So I was working on my script for the video I'm planning on making about the third installment in the Able series, the book called Currents, and then this happened. So now I'm going to talk about this instead. Before I say anything about the movie here, I need a heavy disclaimer. I am not part of the autism community, and also, unfortunately, some further criticisms about this film involve race. I am obviously white. In all of this, it goes without saying that I do not personally have a handle on the issues I want to discuss today. I can only speak from my own perceptions of what I saw in this movie. I will be relying a lot on accounts from people who are in these communities and expressing my opinions therein. I could be wrong, but I still want to speak about this. I personally had no idea that this movie was coming out until Tuesday, like the most recent last Tuesday. I saw a thing on Instagram about it, got curious, started looking stuff up, and decided that I needed to see this for myself. And I did. And, well, it's not good. This movie is directed by Sia. Yes, that's Sia. And it was written by her and her co-writer, Dallas Clayton, who from my understanding is a children's book author. So a songwriter and a children's book author came together for a screenplay. And hey, you know, that could have worked out, but these are very different styles of writing, and just because you're good at one does not mean you're going to excel in another. But all that really matters in Hollywood is names, and they have those, Sia's. So they got the green light and they got the funding. Even before this movie was released to stream, it was already nominated for 2 Golden Globes, which supports my theory that these awards don't mean anything. I don't even think the people who give out these awards ever watch the movies. I know for a fact they don't at the Oscars, they've admitted to it. And it's the only reason why I can fathom that movies like this can get these awards. And I have to believe that, because the alternative is that these people are actually watching these films and not only going, yeah, that was good and not bad at all, but are also going, this deserves an award. Anyways, the movie. The movie literally opens with a form of blackface. I'm gonna play a clip so you can see what it looks like in context and make judgments for yourselves. With that said, I think it's very difficult to ignore the fact that this very white actress has obviously been toned to look much tanner than she actually is, and she's never again presented like this in the rest of the film, which really begs the question of why was this even necessary? But also coupled with the wig and hairstyle that she appears in, it's not a good look. I could almost believe maybe that this wasn't intentional, but at the same time, I still do not understand how people could intentionally make a very white girl look this dark and not think that it's going to be problematic. That's the opening sequence. It's a musical number. There's a lot of those in this movie. And then we meet our supposed main character. Her name is Music. I say supposed because while she's supposed to be the main character, the movie's even titled after her, and the entire premise was sold around her being the main character, she is not. I'm telling you right now, she is not the main character of this movie. Her sister is. Music is played by Maddie Ziegler, I think that's how you say her name. She is recognizable from many of Sia's music videos and performances. At the filming of this movie, the actress herself was 17 years old. By the time it was completed, she was 18. In no way do I think that she should be held responsible for what transpires in this film. She is an actress here, and an actress does what directors, producers, and writers tell them to. She is also just barely not a child anymore, so I hope that people are not going to continue to go after her for this. So, with the story, as a person with autism, Music has a very strict schedule. Music is her name. And this helps her cope with stressful stimuli or the existence of too many all at once. Living with her grandmother, she wakes up, she eats breakfast, she gets her hair put into braids, and her grandmother obviously loves her very much. She then goes on her walk, which is monitored by like neighbors who help watch out for her as she goes to the library. There she reads some books, looks at some books, and then she comes back. One of the neighbors that helps is this lovely, wonderful man from The Princess Diaries, who I am convinced is still the only man on this planet who would treat me right. Joe from The Princess Diaries. Within this trip, the grandmother that we just got introduced to has a stroke or a heart attack or something, and she dies. Music returns to the apartment and can tell that something's wrong. She's obviously very stressed out. Joe, that is not his name in this movie, it's just what I'm going to be calling him, comes into the apartment and sees the situation, and then it just mostly cuts out after that. We see Music, obviously very stressed. We see a gurney, and then it's just done. Fine. Next, we meet our actual main character, Zoo. Zoo is at an AA meeting, I believe, which she is not taking seriously as she's asleep and the meeting's over. She gets woken up and she's having her form signed to say that she attended when she gets a phone call saying that her grandmother is dead. She shows absolutely not a breath of care about this. Like, not even a little bit. And it's not even that she's just like cold on the outside but is deeply saddened on the inside. We never see a single moment of her reacting to this like a normal person throughout the entire movie. She never shows a single second where she grieves the loss of her grandmother. In fact, she kind of of chuckles about it, you know, like a sociopath. And she explains that she never really knew her grandmother, but there are tons of relatives in my life that I don't know very well, and if I heard that they died, I would show some emotion, if not for the fact that I personally feel lost, and for the fact that I'm worried about the people who loved them, the people that they may have been responsible for. People like her little sister, for example, who she knows is autistic, who she knows the grandmother takes care of, and who is a child. So why isn't she even slightly concerned over what might happen to her sister now? She shows up at the apartment mostly to just look for a will, because she is an awful person. Joe alerts her that she is now in charge of music. That night, Zoo actually attempts to call a service to come pick up music for her and take her away. The service hangs up on her because she's obviously very rude about it and doesn't understand the situation she's talking about at all. She has no empathy or even a kernel of care for this young girl who is her sister. In fact, I would go as far as to say that within this movie, she doesn't even see her sister as an actual person. Meanwhile, her sister is in her room, and the boy who lives across the street, who was shown interacting with music during her morning walk, he's shining a flashlight through his window and into her window. He doesn't speak really in this movie, and it seems that he may have a crush on music, but he shines the light, and because of the light, she imagines a music video in her head, and he starts flashing the light, and she loves it. But another thing that I discovered in my internet searches is that flashing lights are not very good for a lot of people with autism. It's part of the sensory intolerism, so that's not a good idea to ever do. Don't just start flashing a light at them. Music still has her own schedule, so she's doing her own thing, but she does rely on Zoo to help her with parts of the schedule, like making breakfast or braiding her hair. Zoo, who barely glanced at the information her grandmother left in her will, it was kind of a form of a will. It basically just alerted Zoo to the fact that there is no money and she has to take care of her sister now. So Zoo doesn't really know what she's supposed to do, and with her schedule now thrown off, and of course all the additional stress of everything that she's gone through, music starts to have an episode. In the articles I read, they are more often than not referred to as meltdowns. They are fairly common in people with autism, as everything can get to be too much and processing it gets difficult. It seems like a lot, but it's really not that much different from a neurotypical person failing to process a situation correctly. For neurotypicals, I guess it usually ends in like rage or panic attacks or anxiety, or even just like completely shutting down emotionally. For autistic people, it can result in a form of a meltdown. And so music is currently having a meltdown, and Zoo obviously has no idea what to do, and then somebody knocks on the door. The person who knocked on the door is Ebo. He was shown with music when she was doing her walk at the beginning, and he's one of the neighbors that helps look out for her. When he sees what is happening, he says he knows just what to do, and he kind of runs into the situation. But what he does is he starts by moving her to a different place, which is sometimes helpful. If the stimuli in a room is obviously causing the meltdown, it's good to go to a different room, probably somewhere where you feel safe and somewhere where things are more familiar. But then what he proceeds to do is he kind of lays her down on the ground and climbs on top of her and holds her down. He says it's a love hug to help calm her down, and later states that he had a younger brother back in his village in an undisclosed part of Africa who was like music and who would calm down when someone would hold him like that. But even me, with my limited expertise and everything about this, watched this scene and went, oh boy, that can't be right. Because for me personally, I'm thinking about a panic attack or an anxiety attack, and grabbing a person in that situation is an awful idea. Yes, for some people that does help calm them down. For some, but for the vast majority, trying to constrain somebody who is in a fit of panic or overstimulated experience, it's not going to end well. It's just going to make it infinitely worse. So I paused the movie, I looked it up, and here's what you're supposed to do in this situation. And keep in mind, this is just very brief. If you want more information about it, I've linked an article below. So the first thing you want to do is probably de-escalate the situation. If there's something that is obviously causing the person to be overstimulated, then remove that from the situation or figure out how to fix it. And get on their level, talk to them very calmly, help them block out whatever is bothering them or extra things that might be bothering them. And sometimes you just have to let them calm themselves down while making sure that they are not hurting themselves or others. But oh my goodness, he just basically sits on her, and that's just not right. That is of course going to make it worse, and could also be very dangerous. This was a huge point of controversy for this movie, as many people with actual experiences with autism were all very much like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And in fact, there has been quite a few instances of children with autism, or even just grown-ups with autism, who have been constrained in those manners, and the result has been injury or even sometimes death. And to spread that misinformation, intentionally or not, could really be disastrous in real-life application. I will definitely talk about this more, but in the meantime, more plot. Ebo and Zoo and Music go on her walk, so Ebo can show the route Music takes to Zoo. This is a bonding moment, I suppose, for our actual two leads, and even though Zoo is offensive and intolerable the entire time, I guess Ebo finds her charming for some reason. He tries to give her important information about music, like her allergies, but Zoo doesn't really pay attention. He also very cheerfully, for some strange reason, at this point talks about his own brother who was like music and who died, and he seems to blame it on the village's prejudices. It's an odd moment for sure, and a lot to unpack that never gets unpacked. After their walk, Zoo jokes about sending music to the people pound, and it's not met with unadulterated disgust or concern, as it should be, because that's super effing offensive, my dude. It's excused as a dark girl vibe, and I don't like it. We get more information on the kid who shines the light. He is also part of an immigrant family in the storyline, and they're always speaking a foreign language according to the subtitles. I watched this on YouTube. Maybe it's different on other streaming platforms, but if you wrote a script for their line, then maybe you could cue us into what they're saying, because just saying speaks foreign language doesn't really cut it. Anyways, all we really need to know about this character is that he's a very quiet boy with a very abusive father. But anyway, Zoo finds a bottle, she looks at it, she dumps down the drain. Keep in mind that she is a recovering alcoholic. I guess the scene was supposed to depict that in some way, but it doesn't really come across. Also, Zoo runs drugs. She goes to a wig shop, which I think is some kind of Easter egg for like Sia, and she goes there to pick up her next shipment and does all of this, her job, while music is with a neighbor. The drug running thing in this movie is also very odd and out of touch. I suppose it's supposed to be freeing and open and displaying in a way that's not criticizing it, but it undermines the situations people probably find themselves in to end up having that job. It also undermines how hazardous that job can be, and it reads very much like people have no idea what this lifestyle is like, or what it's like to be poor or in poverty. They have no idea what any of those experiences are, but they still just try to depict it anyway, and that's very on brand and the same with their depictions of autism. Dropping off drugs at one client, she gets another potential client's number that could be her ticket to paradise. That's a big thing with Zoo. She's trying to get to paradise, that's what she calls it. She wants to move to Costa Rica and start her life over. We're never given really clear motivations for this, but because of this, music is just in her way, and that's very much how she treats her. Ebo is seen struggling with rent and money. This should be important since this movie takes place in a very impoverished neighborhood, but again, it doesn't really come up very much. This movie is very out of touch with reality. Ebo works teaching kids boxing. He shows the girls his studio. There's a competition coming up, and the boy with the flashing light, he's part of the studio and is going to be part of that competition. After that, they go for a walk outside of music's usual comfort zone, and Ebo explains a little bit about nonverbal autism and how she can still hear and understand what they say. All the while, music is getting overstimulated and has another breakdown. Ebo won't help because they're in public space, and he is a black man, and he does not want to get in trouble for trying to console or touch a screaming white girl, which is totally fair, but that means it's up to Zoo to try and de-escalate the situation. So of course she sits on her. And this is yet another example of constraining a person with autism to get them to calm down, which, to state clearly, does not work and is extremely dangerous. Zoo and Ebo bond some more. He tells her of his ex-wife, who is about to marry his brother, and this lad just has like a lot going on, and then she very casually drops in a suicide attempt on him. It's never brought up again. Ebo trains the kids for the boxing match some more. The boy from before, the flashing light boy, he watches some people dance, and I suppose this is supposed to convey that that's what he wants to do, not boxing, but again, never unpacked, never gone into. Ebo and the girls are hanging out again, playing piano and singing and stuff. He almost stays the night, but then leaves instead after another music video sequence thingy conveys that he's sad. Zoo brings music, the character, to the client to give the drugs away. The client is Sia, like as Sia, it's Sia playing herself. Sia wants a lot more drugs than Zoo has, and music is touching things and getting yelled at. There's another music video sequence. Zoo gets a giant bag of pills from her dealer to give to Sia against his better judgment. She also has to deliver some HIV medicine to another client. This client ends up being Ebo. Never is this really talked about again. It's just there. It's just thrown in to represent another thing without any care or thought given to it. It's as if the writers were trying to do everything at once, represent everything all at once, and in doing so, did poorly in every area. Zoo now has music and is taking her to go finish the job and drop off the drugs. Music gets stung by a bee, which is one of her allergies. Zoo runs her to the ER, forgetting her bag full of drugs at the park. While this is happening, Ebo's boxing match is going on. The girls were supposed to come, but they obviously don't show up. And Flashing Light Kid, his name's Felix, by the way, in this movie, he walks up to the guy he's supposed to fight and just hugs him instead, which is fine, but then the guy hugs him back and starts crying, and I don't know, it was just a really weird scene for me. I don't think that's how this would play out at all. But the bag is gone. Zoo should be in so much trouble for this. At this point, I was hella scared, because that's a lot of money she just lost, her boss / drug dealer man, and I really thought like he'd come after her, or someone would come after her, or she'd get sold out, or get in trouble, he'd tell the cops on her, you know, a punishment for her actions, but it never really happens. happens, she just loses her job, I guess. Stressed and miserable, she falls off the wagon and drinks a bunch. She goes to Ebo's apartment and tries to tell him that she doesn't care about the AIDS thing, and he can tell that she's drunk, and he tries to get her back to her apartment. She yells a lot, she causes a scene, she goes to a bar instead, gets trashed, and then falls on the stairs and breaks her nose. This is supposed to be the dramatic climax that leads to character changing in this movie, and it does, but no build-up up to this moment makes it make sense that Zhu is going to change her actions. We have no reason to believe that any of this will spark change in her character, but it just does anyways. Even though she's only been shown to this point as being extremely self-absorbed, only caring about herself, having no regard for other people, this moment for some reason just makes her do a 180. And while this is all happening, Felix, the boy with the light, he buys Music a service dog with money that he saved up. His father hits his mom, he tries to stop his dad, and his dad accidentally kills him. There's a music sequence right after where Felix is there with Music, and it seems to show that Music also had feelings for him, and in the sequence he goes to be with her grandma. And it's a good sequence, it's very beautiful, the music is nice, and the actor who plays Felix does a great job. But what is this scene? It just drops. It's just gone now. It's never brought up again. Felix is never mentioned again. He just gets killed off like a red shirt in an action movie, and we are supposed to care. But the movie obviously doesn't care about him. Ebo finds Zhu the next morning, and she's all beat up, and she says she keeps messing things up, which is a very valid point, and that she needs help. And then it's just a montage time jump where she's no longer all beaten up, and she's getting clean, and it's been a month. So we don't get to see any of that struggle, any of that growth. She just is better now. And despite everything that led up to this point that would lead us to believe that this is not the case, it just is. Still, despite all of that, where it really did seem like her motivations might be changing to like her sister, at this scene, she's taking Music to go drop her off at a facility before she herself takes off. But I don't know where she got the money, because she was saving up with the job she lost to move to Costa Rica, and she lost all of her money, and she hasn't been able to find work since. Meanwhile, Ebo's on the way to his brother's wedding. She almost drops Music off at the facility, but Music asks her not to, says she loves her, and says that she's her sister. And then they flee out the doors, and Zhu has completely changed her mind. They jump in a cab, and she instructs him to go to the wedding. So they're at the wedding of Ebo's brother, and they basically just crashed the whole thing, going up on stage while Ebo is making his speech. And Zhu confesses her feelings and says she wants to change, and how she's decided to keep Music and stay here, all this stuff. But she also just flat out lies in the scene too. In the scene, she very clearly says that she quit her job. But her job being the drug running, she did not quit her job, she got fired. And then she tried to get her job back, and he said no. So that's a lie. And Ebo, poor Ebo, he goes with it. He introduces them to his family, and in the middle of this other person's wedding, they play a song on the piano and Music begins to sing. And like, I get it, final moment, drama, whatever, but this is someone else's wedding. This is not about you. And oh my goodness, the secondhand embarrassment I got from the scene was surreal. So now they're a happy family, and the service dog Felixbot arrives, and no one asks any questions about where the dog came from. In fact, they never mention that poor boy again. We have an end scene song where all the characters are together, and I have to say, the one good thing about this movie was seeing Joe dance with rainbow paint on his face. That was the only scene I liked in this movie, that one. Now it's over. Okay, that's enough of my opinions for right now. I want to read some reviews from people on the autistic spectrum. As much as I can sit here and say all of my thoughts, it matters very little in the end without listening to them. So I went to Rotten Tomatoes, where the movie currently has a critic review of 12% and an audience score of 22%, and I took every review I could find where the writer identified themselves as being on the autistic spectrum. I want to read what they think and what they convey, as I think it is more important than what I have to say. Surprisingly, there's actually a couple good reviews from people who identified themselves as either autistic or being the parents of somebody who is autistic. So I'm going to read those first. The first one is from Michelle A. She says, I believe this movie is absolutely fantastic. I do not feel like it is offensive in any way. I have 4 kids on the spectrum, and they are all different. Some are very affectionate and others do not want it. Some require a tight squeeze to calm them. I do this with my youngest, and others do not. I thought the acting by Maddie was very realistic and well thought out, even down to the hand movements. I am not at all offended by this movie, and neither are my children. My youngest son, who doesn't watch movies, actually walks by and says Music. He was paying enough attention to the movie to know the little girl when she appears on the screen as Music. This made me smile. My daughter, who loves dance, found it invigorating. She made me purchase it. Take this from a mother of autistic children. It was a great movie and worth the money. Watch the movie with an open mind and the thought that every autistic child is not the same, and this is just a movie about one child's life. That's one of the goods. Here's another good. Absolutely amazing movie. The hate this film is getting is undeserved. Sia represented my community wonderfully. People need to realize that not all people with autism are the same. They're hating because she is a woman director, that's all. Don't believe the lies. Thank you, Sia. Don't believe the critics for a minute. I have 2 family members on the spectrum. My husband, daughter, and I thought it was beautiful and extremely moving. A combination of sadness, joy, reality, and fantasy. We all cried our hearts out. So with that one, the 2 family members are not identified, so I don't know if they are the daughter and the husband, but still, I thought I would read it anyway. So those were the good, and obviously there are a lot more bad. I really did take every single review that I found. Alright, for the bad. This movie promotes a lethal restriction that is commonly used and frequently kills autistic people. Its depiction of autistic people is disgustingly stereotypical. This is what happens when you make a movie about autistic people while actively rejecting input from any real autistic voices. Nothing about us without us. Frey says, exploitative, tone-deaf, and dangerous. An awful, awful, awful representation of autism and how to care for autistic people. Sincerely, an autistic person. As an autistic person, the idea of this movie makes me cringe. This is a disaster and never should have been made. Incredibly harmful. Jordan says, as a self-advocate in the autism community, this has been an extremely painful experience for us, but one that I hope will enlighten the general public to our perspective. Music employs harmful tropes and perpetuates stereotypes of autistic people in addition to casting a neurotypical actress. This one is definitely worth the skip. I have autism myself, and my god, this movie was a pain to watch. The constant jerky movements, the abuse, and what the frick was up with music falling in love with her abuser. What the frick was the strobe light seizure fever dream. Bridget says, as an actually autistic woman, I have never seen such an offensive film. Blatant mockery disguised as activism. Music manages an inaccurate and offensive portrayal of autistic women that left me at many times hurt and angered. Even ignoring the ableism, the plot is disconnected and shallow. There's no character development to Zoo or Ebo. The music moments were disconnected, brash, and more fitting for a music video than a movie. I'm autistic, and this movie was a disgusting mockery of autistic people, says Lindsay. There are so many problems with this film. I have no idea how it was greenlit by any of the people that reviewed it. It's grossly offensive, and the creator even managed to sprinkle some racism into it. Was she trying to make the most offensive movie on the planet? Rose says, disgusting and ableist movie. I am autistic and this movie sickens me. It paints autistic people in such a horrible light and perpetuates so many harmful stereotypes. You cannot watch this movie and claim to be an ally to the autistic community. Serena says, horrible portrayal of autism. As someone on the spectrum, this was highly offensive and misleading. Not only does it not allow for autistic watchers due to the heavy sounds and colors, but it is a complete mockery of those the film is supposed to be about. Nothing but feel-good for abled folks. First off, I am an autistic educator, advocate, influencer, and I am actually autistic. This film was contrived and poorly executed. The movie serves to further dangerous ableist narratives and paint autistics as burdens on everyone around them who are only useful when they can be used as inspiration for the neurotypicals to grow. The plot was loose, characters lacked any true development for growth, and the autistic girl music, whom the movie was supposed to be centered around, spends most of the time serving as a background image for the underwear shots of Kate Hudson. I'm embarrassed for Sia and everyone involved in this project. Jasper says this movie makes a mockery of autistic people. The main actress isn't autistic. Her performance is an offensive caricature of autistic people and a mockery of our facial expressions and stims. There's autistic abuse scenes that are 1, unnecessary, and 2, have no warning. And the visuals are harmful, not to mention the creator of the movie attacked autistic people on Twitter for weeks for her criticism. This movie and Sia deserve no money or praise. Sincerely, an autistic person. Alright, performances. Excluding Maddie Ziegler, and that's just because I have more to say on her acting specifically, the actors did a great job for what they were given. Obviously, Joe was perfect, and the performances were definitely given a lot of effort. Leslie Odom Jr. did especially well, though I do have more to say on his character. The boy who played Felix, his name is Edo Cavillo. He did a good job. Kate Hudson does great. She's a great actress. Doesn't mean her character is even mildly likable. And then there's Maddie Ziegler. I don't blame her, like I've said before, but there was a lot of complaint over her portrayal of a mostly nonverbal person with autism. A lot of people were saying she looked more like a caricature of an autistic person, and that's not a good look. I cannot find any sources of her stating this, but reviews alike continue to mention that the actress expressed great discomfort with portraying a character who is autistic, and even stated that she felt like the way she was being instructed to act was making fun of them, but I also can't find any sources for this, so take it with a grain of salt. Because of my limited knowledge on the subject, I decided to watch some YouTube videos about actual nonverbal autistic kids and their families. After seeing real-life nonverbal autistic kids and the way they move and convey information, I would say, in my opinion, that it is is a very, very valid criticism. The acting is way overdone and comes across as a mockery of the autistic community and is portrayed in full-fledged stereotypical fashion. I'm going to read this tweet because I feel like it gives some more information. So it says, stims are autistic body language, and the biggest mistake is to portray them as a random thing autistic people do. Most of the time, autistic people stim when they're excited or anxious, and they can be a sign of autistic replay going on in an autistic person's head. If Sia was ever going to attempt this movie, especially casting a neurotypical actress, she should have invested way more time and resources into consultants who were on the spectrum at the very least. Even more so, it is now time to discuss the controversy over casting Maddie Ziegler to begin with. Sia said in several tweets, though I think they may be deleted by now, that she didn't want to cast an actual nonverbal autistic person, as that would not be a fair environment for them. And while I think there may be something to this, I still think that there is so much more that needs to be discussed. It is possible to star a nonverbal autistic person in this role. It would probably be challenging for them and the directors, but it is possible, and if accommodations need to be made, then make those accommodations. And if for whatever reason it can't or shouldn't be done, which is not my place to say by any means, is there not still the ability to cast a verbal person with autism? Is it not possible to still have that representation? And I'm actually asking this. I want to know what people think. I want to know if that would be representative enough as an alternative. We are definitely in controversial territory here because the autistic community is a community. They're a community of people who have a unique culture, a unique lifestyle, a unique way of viewing the world. And in casting a non-autistic actor, where does this overlap with casting a white actor to play a person of color? Does it overlap? Because it feels like it does a bit to me, at least. But I also know this is almost always done with portrayals of people with autism in cinema. Is it enough to have a person in this culture, in this community, making the movie or directing the character? Is it enough to do thorough research, more thorough than this for sure, and have accurate representation? And the movement seems to be tied to giving actors who are the things the characters are being represented as the roles, because there are so few roles for them in mainstream media, since their representation is so limited. And I think that is fully fair, and full effort should be made to accommodate that. Who better to play a person with autism than a person with autism? It's definitely an open conversation. I would love to hear y'all's opinions on the matter, and at the very least, this movie did bring a lot of attention to this conversation and the strain of autistic representation specifically and autistic actors. But another thing, the character Ebo. So we've already established that this movie is oblivious to the matters it is trying to address. Here's another thing they did poorly. I had to look it up because the movie really only says he's from Africa, but there is a Ghana flag at one point in the wedding scene, so I think he's from there. But this is an African character, an immigrant to America, and like basically all of the characters in this movie, his story, no matter how many beats are thrown in there about ex-wives and AIDS, because that's not his story, it's never gotten into. His story is entirely about him being there for the sisters, him taking care of the sisters, him waiting on the sisters, him showing up and giving Zoo all the answers she needs. And it's really not a good look, especially with the ethnicity of this character. And the whole supporting cast is not exempt from this, even from Joe to Felix. And once Felix's role drops from being about the sisters, you know, when he dies, he's just dropped entirely. No one who isn't there to support them matters in the story. And that brings up basically the biggest issue with this movie, the big overarching that's a bad look issue. I've already said that this movie is not about music, no matter how much it thinks it is. It is about Zoo, who has to take care of her sister with autism. It's about having to deal with someone with autism. Music is only ever portrayed as a hindrance or a burden who gets in the way and makes everything difficult, while our main character Zoo has to overcome that and love her anyways. That's the movie. That's what it's about. And for some reason, that is supposed to be representative of this community of autistic people, and it's an awful thing to have to say. It's another one of those instances, kind of like the Cuties movie that came out last year that also had a lot of controversy, where the movie is claiming to be one thing. It is claiming to be representative and a story about an autistic girl, but it's not. And as it is, it's not a movie for people with autism, just as Cutie was not a movie for the young girls it claimed to represent. Music, the movie, isn't about them, or their lives, or what they have to go through, or what they have to overcome in a society that wasn't built for them. It's not about growth or learning or overcoming or empowerment, not for them. It's about it for the people who have to deal with them. And I keep saying that, the word deal, because that is how it is portrayed, and that is not how I believe in any capacity it should ever be portrayed. Pair this with the flashing lights in a lot of scenes, and this movie could even be unwatchable for people on the autistic spectrum. And if ever anyone creates a story representing a group that it's not for, that cannot even be watched by them, then the movie is already a disaster. And with all of the other things they address, poverty, abuse, substance abuse, addiction, abortion, AIDS, being an immigrant in America, being poor. None of it is dealt with or given any time or voice, so it's not for those people either. So who is it for? I think the answer is clearly nobody. Real quick, I know it doesn't really tie into anything, but I still want to talk about it. The music in this movie. The music is fine. I like Sia's music just fine. The songs were good, even some of the sequences were really nice to look at, you know? But most of the songs show limited to no connection to what's going on in the movie at all, so it's not like it has anything to do with story or ties in at all, or even most of the time progresses anything. Sometimes it does. It's just there under the excuse that music, the character, is using it to escape. So it's jarring and not a great fit. And with all the issues brought up in this movie that the music has no ties to, it feels worse. If you want to make a movie that stars the songs of your album, by all means do it. Whatever. But maybe make a movie that actually ties into the stuff you sing about, that can find meaning in your lyrics. Now, the aftermath. Even before this movie released, people were already warning Sia about using a neurotypical actress in this role. And at this point, Sia did not listen to anyone. I have also heard that Sia let go of a neurodivergent, either actress or consultant, because the environment was too stressful on her. So after this movie came out, the outrage started almost immediately, which is fair. I just want to walk through what all happened to my understanding. So obviously this movie got nominated for awards and was then released to streaming platforms. Articles started to drop. One in particular I read from the LA Times portrays it as a very good representation and a very good movie, which but more than that was the outrage on social media. It seems that in the first wave, Sia was very defensive of her work, a kind of typical reaction to have. Just so suddenly have people come after you, defense is normal. Do I think she should have said everything that she did? Absolutely not. And apparently she doesn't either, because she deleted all the tweets. These are the tweets that I was able to recover. And this one in particular, we see someone tweet that several autistic actors, including themselves, responded to her tweets, and they said they could have acted in on short notice. So it's calling Sia out for the excuses that she was making. Sia then responded, "Maybe you're just a bad actor," and then some other stuff. She also tries to defend herself, saying that she cast 3 neuroatypical people, 3 trans folk, and not as prostitutes or drug addicts, but as doctors, nurses, and singers. And she says, "My heart has always been in the right place." I think it's an interesting and weird defense to try and take. As the outrage and criticism continued, though, it does seem like she took a turn, and her latest tweets say stuff along the following. She says, "I'm sorry," and she says music in no way condones or recommends the use of restraint on autistic people. She also claims that she plans to remove the restraint scenes from all future printings, and she says she listened to the wrong people and that is her responsibility. Her research was clearly not thorough enough, not wide enough. Obviously, this apology is not for me, so it is in no way up to me to accept it or not. At this point, it seems that she has deactivated her Twitter for the time being, and before I continue, it is also worth knowing that she said there would be a warning at the beginning of the movie and that the constraint scenes would be removed. At the time I watched this movie, February 16th, neither of those things were in effect. Again, I watched it on YouTube, maybe it's different on other streaming platforms. Also, Sia stated that she worked with the organization Autism Speaks to help make the movie, and there is a card thanking the organization in the credits. This group is apparently very controversial, even being labeled as a hate group. From my understanding, they rely on a lot of fear tactics to gain funding, portraying people with autism in a very negative light that is extremely distasteful. She claimed she did not know they were controversial when she hired them, which could be true, but did she not research them at all before agreeing to work with them? There is currently a petition in progress for Sia to take down the movie entirely from streaming platforms. With that said, I don't even think that's possible. Since the movie is on streaming platforms, that means that the distribution rights have already been sold. So you would have to petition each individual company to remove the movie. Still, there is another petition to rescind the nomination for the Golden Globes for the movie. I will link it below if anyone wants to take part in signing it. You do whatever you want, no pressure. Still, I don't think it should get taken down. Why? Well, I'm grateful to this movie. Is it a good movie? Not even a little bit. Is it misrepresentative and full of misinformation? Yes. But if it wasn't for this movie, if it wasn't for me watching it, I can't say I would have ever looked into these issues, ever researched them, ever informed myself about them. And I got to because of this movie. And more so than the movie, the people who spoke out about this movie. That's what brought it to my attention. And I hope to God someday soon we see accurate information and a movie featuring the autistic community in a healthy and constructive light that can do do this very same thing and get people invested, get people researching, but for now, this is what we have. The catch is that always as viewers, we have to make the effort to view responsibly. If something doesn't sit right, look it up. If something isn't right, call it out. And as I see people doing this to this movie, I'm also seeing an attention to this issue right now, to these people in their lives and the poor representation they are stuck with at this time. This movie is bad, but in silver linings, it has done some good. Hopefully more good than bad at the end of the day. So should you watch this movie? No. But should you try to learn from this? Absolutely. And there's no better resources than the voices of the misrepresented. Below, I will link in the description the resources that I myself used. Maybe instead of watching this movie, spend time reading that instead. This movie may suck, but it's brought highlighted attention to issues that I, at least, had never really looked into before. So yes, it sucks. It's a bad movie, but I'm still glad it exists for that.